Welcome to This Week in Local, a Locology podcast featuring lively conversations about the local digital ecosystem, hosted by Locology analysts Mike Boland and Charles Laughlin.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to This Week in Local. I'm Charles Laughlin, Senior Analyst at Locology, joined by my colleague Mike Boland. Mike, how's it going?
Hey, Charlie. Going okay.
Great. So, Mike, tell us something you're working on.
Yeah, so I'm looking at a new update from Apple. And we don't talk about Apple a lot in the sort of context of their work in Apple Maps and serving local businesses.
Right.
They're of course known as just a broader tech giant play, but they're actually doing a lot that sort of gets overshadowed in the sort of the more mainstream tech press. But anyway, they have a feature called Business Connect, and I'll get into what that is in a second. And there's a new sort of update that lets local businesses sort of decide with greater granularity the types of user actions they want to drive in their Apple Maps place card. And that place card shows up as almost like, think of it like listings, like Apple Maps version of listings. When you search for something, when there's a map pin and you click on it, that's the place card. So businesses can sort of decide what they want to show there. So backing up for a second, that there's more they're doing there to customize, but backing up, this Apple Business Connect deserves a bit of a backgrounder. So for those unfamiliar, this is essentially Apple's business-facing tool for small businesses mostly that lets them sort of take control over how their listings, or again, that place card appears.
Apple
in
My
Apple
Business?
Maps. Well, that's sort of what it is. I mean, for everyone familiar with Google Business Profiles, which is formerly Google My Business, it's very similar. They can take control. They can update their hours of operation and their menus and their, mask policies or other just dynamic business info. And like Google, it's a smart move because it really just engenders greater scalability. Apple, like Google, they're massive, but they can't manage all that SMB data on their own. So they essentially crowdsource it, all those business details, to the businesses themselves. And one thing we can go over in a little bit is, how they're motivating them to do that, both Apple and Google. But the point is, this is the business-facing feature that allows them to establish their presence, in this case, on Apple Maps. Now, that's the background. What is this new feature? So for a long time, what they already allowed businesses to do was to sort of toggle between a few different sort of calls to action. And they included things that sort of pulled in Apple's partners. So Apple Maps famously works with partners that are sort of vertically oriented. Everyone from Instacart to Yelp to others, which sort of, as a side note, contrasts Google's strategy to just sort of like build everything internally. So anyway, those map cards have traditionally allowed businesses to do things like, a hotel reservation through booking.com, or a restaurant reservation through OpenTable, or ordering groceries through Instacart. And again, those are just like a set list of partners. So the newest update sort of broadens that capability. So in addition to those just sort of templated actions, they can just sort of like have these like customized links that are essentially like links to whatever functionality the business wants to drive, restaurant menu, or feed them into a transactional flow, or like buy an event ticket. And it's essentially as simple as just sort of inserting a link. And that can be a web link. It can be a deep link into your app if you happen to have one. I mean, it's Apple after all, and they're vertically integrated. They can send links into other apps. So really the point is that it's an incremental change in having more customization for small businesses. But I think the story here isn't just that incremental addition, but the broader story around Apple continuing to advance and invest in Apple Maps as sort of a competitor to Google Maps. And it's doing a decent job of that. Over the last few years, it's really invested a lot into Apple Maps. And I have a lot to say on the why. But I'll pause there. And one last thing I'll say is the way this sort of looks to a user is that, these sort of calls to action appear at the top of a given business's place card once that place card is activated. Again, those cards can sort of pop up within the Apple Maps interface when you're searching for something, or like if you're just scrolling around the map and you click on a map pin and it reveals more info. That's where that sort of place card comes into play.
Right. So I have a few thoughts, and one is sort of, what is Apple's bigger objective with Maps
Yeah.
now? Because I'm a pretty lazy iPhone user. I just use what's kind of built in and add the apps I absolutely need. And so I just use the maps that Apple provides because they're adequate for me.
Yeah.
And I don't know how typical I am, because I hear everyone say, "Oh, I just use Google Maps on the iPhone," which it's not hard to do necessarily, but and then maybe it's a better experience. But I just I'll just use what's here. It seems fine, And so what's the problem for Apple? Because obviously the install base of iPhones is sufficient, you would think, for Apple to be dominant in Maps. And talk about why Apple isn't crushing it in Maps. Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, they are doing quite well catching up, but I think that the reason why they don't have the pole position, despite that, on deck default position on iPhones or on, most iOS devices more broadly, is because they are the challenger. Google had a first mover advantage. And Google just became synonymous with search and maps. So Apple's position was one of a challenger that came later. That's one reason. The other reason is, out of the gate, we all remember the famous sort of circa 2010 Mapgate situation where, it came out, it had the signature Apple polish, but the functionality behind it, which is really the thing that matters most in mapping, is not the bells and whistles, but like, will it get me from point A to point B and not drive me off a cliff?
And not driving into the ocean.
Yeah. Right. So that so Apple has been spending years sort of alleviating that sort of black eye that was left. I think most people have forgotten about it, and they're doing a great job. Yeah. So it's really two things. It's sort of the functionality, the challenger position, and Google's early mover advantage. But in Apple's credit, it has been doing a lot, as I've been investing a lot. The feature set, the functionality is very functional and slick, as opposed to that like first generation many years ago.
Right.
But to get to your question of why, I think that's important. And this gets to our famous like follow the money sort of principle. We should have a little soundbite for it every time we like move into follow the money.
As much as we'd love to say we invented that.
Oh no, it's a common phrase.
Framework.
But but it comes up a lot in these discussions. So anyway, it's follow the money. And if you follow the money with Apple, to answer that question of why, often with these types of tech investments and products, and you're like, why are they investing in this? It's two things. It's either to sort of like embolden a current or protect a current core revenue stream, or to sort of open up new revenue streams. And in Apple Maps case, I think it's both. So Apple Maps, the reason that it's all these advantages, the reason why Apple is really investing in it, is to make iPhones more attractive. That's their core revenue stream. They're a hardware company. And, if Apple Maps is something that is as differentiated as it's starting to be and as they want to make it, it is yet another sort of thing on the checklist of the differentiator for why you would buy an iPhone as opposed to an Android-based device, besides camera, besides all the other things. Now, that's one reason. The other reason, getting to that, incremental secondary revenue streams, is where Apple, I think, is increasingly going, where it has to go for such a large company. It has to keep, finding places to grow, is going to be sort of promotions, ad revenue. And it's sort of stepped into that world a bit over the last, starting with iAd many years ago, that sort of fizzled, but it's been doing a lot in terms of being a place because it has so much engagement, so many eyeballs. Its devices are in so many hands. It realized that it can start to do that. Now, it has a sort of balancing act there, because that incremental revenue stream, it doesn't want to put the cart before the horse and actually degrade that core revenue stream by making it just sort of an ad-filled, cumbersome sort of UX. They're still very careful to make that Apple polish, and not a lot of ads, but when sort of tastefully done with sponsorship, there's a lot they could do there with this, what we're talking about today when it comes to Apple Maps, business promotions. I think that's where they're going with that. For now, they're just sort of nailing down the UX. So, I think that's why I would say that they're really investing in this.
And I say that I don't like to put you on the spot to come up with stats, but I do it all the time. So I
Hmm.
guess I shouldn't say that. Is there anything that measures, and again, these are not, always the most transparent companies, but is there anything out there being shared by Apple or anyone that says, okay, here's the progress they've made in getting small businesses to engage with maps or to, put their data into it, et cetera, to show any growth in sort of that small business,
Yeah.
engagement growth,
So
whatever it is. Yeah.
Apple is more tight-lipped than most companies when it comes to
Yeah.
revealing
Granted,
data.
that's
But I
kind of
will
why I said
say,
that. Yeah.
yeah, but I will say the installed
Mhm.
base of Apple devices globally is over 1 billion devices.
Right.
And that gets to one thing I alluded to earlier, which is how they're motivating SMBs to actually show up and do this. Like not everyone can
Right.
do that. It's a process you have to go on. They make it as easy as possible, but you still have to like take time out of your day, go on, claim your listing, update it,
Yeah.
all that stuff. Now, as a comparison, Google has motivated businesses to do that because they dangle the sort of SEO carrot. Or actually, it's really it's a
Yeah. If you
carrot
don't
and a
do
stick.
this, no one will know you'll be the tree falling in the forest if you don't do this,
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and with all things SEO and Google's motivations, it's a carrot and a stick in terms of
Yeah.
like looking at it as boosting your ranking factors or getting
Hmm.
deranked if you're just not compliant. So anyway, Apple has similarly a lot of leverage in motivating business to do that, but it's in a slightly different flavor. It's not dangling that SEO carrot, but it is you know implicitly telling SMBs, we have 1 billion devices out there, and a lot of people use Apple Maps, and if you're not there, that just sort of diminishes your presence for
Hmm.
a lot of consumers that are out there using Apple Maps, looking for things to do or to buy or to see
Yeah.
in their vicinity, and
Dumbasses
they
like me who just use it
want to
because
be
it's
there.
there. And yeah. Yeah. And I can't be alone. I mean, I don't know what the use of, again, fishing for stats that you may not have at your fingertips, but what the usage of Apple Maps by an iPhone user versus Google Maps is, and how that's shifted over the years. Because again, there's that default use that's easier, but there's also that default use. Oh, Google, that means Maps. Therefore, I'm going to use Google Maps wherever I am. I don't know how much of a shift has been happening there, and
Yeah,
if that shift has been dramatic, small businesses should be made aware of this and catch up to it, right? So,
well,
but if
sure,
it's
yeah.
not happening, yeah,
And that's the name of the game for Apple, right? I mean, the
yeah,
first step is to make a really slick interface, make people want to use it.
hmm,
And then the second step is to be able to say, okay, now we're on this many devices, so businesses should be there. When the third step is monetization. But back to
right,
that first step, they're investing in all those features, the user-facing features, like sort of slick flyover imagery and just a
yeah,
really sort of attractive and immersive UX. They also have some really cool features. Like there's this thing that they do, which is it's I think it's known as offline mode. So
hmm,
if you are like traveling internationally and you have like a data plan that's expensive that you're traveling with and
yeah.
don't want to
I've
use
been
up,
there. That's a
or if you're in
pain.
like
Yeah,
an urban canyon where just
hmm,
GPS sort of doesn't work that well,
hmm.
um, it can track you using the offline map. You can be offline, but you can still utilize the
Oh,
GPS chip. So, I mean, that's the thing. When the first thing you think of with offline mapping is, well, how do you know where I am as I'm moving around the map? It can, even though you're technically offline in terms of not being connected to the cell towers, the device through its inertial measurement unit IMU plus a number of other things like GPS chip can still follow you around even though you're technically offline, but the map you're
hmm,
looking at had been downloaded in advance. So you can picture a lot of
yeah.
use cases. So that's just one example. They're doing a lot of
That's
things
a great huge case I
differentiate.
would use, because
Yeah,
I've been on these international trips where you're like, I need walking directions to this restaurant that's not that far
yeah.
away, but I have no idea where I
And
am.
what you do in
But I
that
don't want to,
situation is
yeah.
like
Go
what you
ahead.
do in that
No, you don't
situation
want to use data. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, but what in you're not downloading the entire globe. What you do is you download
Right.
like a section of Paris to the phone that you're
Right.
in, and then you activate that offline when you just open the Apple Maps app. So, yeah, a lot of stuff like that they're doing to just really sort of gain
Okay.
market share ground on Google Maps.
Okay. Well, they've won me over. You just won me over with that last example. Okay,
There you go.
Mike, I think we'll probably have to end it right there. Why don't you read us out?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Charlie. Thanks, everyone, for listening. This has been This Week in Local. Stay tuned every week for more episodes. You can find the show on all major podcast networks and find out more at locology.com. So please subscribe, like, and comment. Your engagement helps others find us. And if you're interested in being a guest or sponsor, you can email us at podcast@locology.com. So I'm Mike Boland with Charles Laughlin. Our producer is Dara Sweat. So thanks for listening and see you next time.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Locology's This Week in Local with Mike Boland and Charles Laughlin. Be sure to subscribe for more.